We often imagine the origins of the world's major faiths as isolated, sudden events. A prophet in an empty desert, receiving a brand new vision out of nowhere, completely disconnected from the civilizations that came before. But the ancient Mediterranean and Near East operated as a deeply interconnected network. Through thousands of years of trade routes and migrating populations, philosophical concepts and stories flowed freely across borders. For nearly 2,000 years, starting around 2686 BCE and running through the New Kingdom, the religious literature of ancient Egypt formed the dominant cultural bedrock of this entire region. Because of this massive influence, modern scholars notice a distinct pattern when they place ancient Egyptian papyri side by side with later biblical and Quranic scriptures. They find overlapping narrative structures, shared legal frameworks, and identical metaphors. Ancient Egypt provided the foundational cultural vocabulary for the region, a library of established ideas that later religions utilized to articulate their distinct spiritual visions. We can see this vocabulary at work in the Tale of Two Brothers, an Egyptian story written around 1200 BCE. The plot follows a virtuous younger brother named Bata. When his older brother's wife tries to seduce him, Bata refuses. In retaliation, she simulates an illness and falsely accuses Bata of attempting to assault her. Centuries later, the Book of Genesis features the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. The structure is identical. Potiphar's wife attempts to seduce Joseph, he flees to maintain his moral integrity, and she uses his discarded garment as physical evidence to falsely accuse him of the exact same crime. By the 7th century CE, this sequence appears again in the Quran. In Surah Yusuf, the wife of an Egyptian noble tries to entice the prophet Yusuf. He turns away, she tears his shirt from behind, and claims he assaulted her, until a wise witness proves his innocence by showing the tear occurred as he was running away. We find similar lineage in accounts of miraculous events. In the Egyptian papyrus Westcar, composed around 1800 BCE, a lector priest uses divine magic to stack one side of a lake's water on top of the other, turning it into dry ground. It is the same visual mechanism we see in the Book of Exodus when Moses parts the Red Sea, and in the Quran when Allah commands Musa to strike the water, splitting it into towering, stationary walls. As these ancient motifs moved from Egyptian folklore into Abrahamic scriptures, their purpose shifted. They evolved from tales of physical magic into enduring lessons about divine providence and maintaining moral fortitude under intense trial. This shared vocabulary extends into the rules of how humans should treat one another. Central to Egyptian society was a concept called Ma'at. Ma'at was the personification of absolute truth, cosmic order, and social justice, standing in direct opposition to chaos and falsehood. This holistic view of an ordered universe maps cleanly onto the early Christian concept of divine righteousness. When the Gospel of Matthew urges believers to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, it is invoking a comprehensive spiritual and social order deeply reminiscent of Ma'at. We find the same cosmological framework in Islam through concepts like Adl, meaning divine justice, and Mizan, the cosmic scale. Surah Al-Rahman describes how the heavens were raised and a balance was imposed, instructing humans not to transgress within that balance. This image compares the biblical Book of Proverbs with the Egyptian instruction of Amenemope. The translations are near verbatim. Amenemope instructs, "Do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor afflict the afflicted at the gate." Proverbs 22 reads, "Do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate." For these civilizations, ethical behavior was never treated as mere human legislation. Protecting the vulnerable was a cosmological imperative, a requirement to keep physical and spiritual chaos out of the world. This illustration from the Egyptian Book of the Dead shows a post-mortem trial where moral conduct is measured on physical scales. Dating back to 1550 BCE, this theology shows the god Anubis placing the deceased heart on a balance scale, opposite the feather of truth. This specific iconographic theology tracks straight into later traditions. By the medieval period, Eastern Orthodox and Catholic artwork heavily featured the Archangel Michael holding the scales of justice, weighing human souls against their earthly deeds during the final judgment. Islam maintains this concept even more explicitly. The Quran promises that physical scales, known as mawazin, will be set up on the day of resurrection, so that no soul is treated unjustly, down to the weight of a mustard seed. The universal human anxiety regarding death and our deep desire for ultimate justice created a shared architectural framework for the afterlife that survived across multiple continents for thousands of years. When we plot out this history, we see that foundational ideas, like the physical preservation and resurrection of the body, creation through the spoken divine word, and post-mortem judgment scales, predate the Bible and the Quran by millennia. Acknowledging ancient Egyptian roots does not invalidate the truth claims of Christianity, Islam, or Judaism. Instead, these overlaps show how the core concepts of the Near East survived and adapted as civilizations rose and fell. These shared tropes and frameworks demonstrate that the region's spiritual thought was part of a broader, shared intellectual landscape. While specific theology shifted and the names of the deities evolved, the core questions people asked about divine authority, human responsibility, and moral order remained remarkably constant. This history of shared ideas shows how later faiths were shaped by a pre-existing cultural environment. Long before it was printed in modern scriptures, this vocabulary of justice and order was etched into the tombs and papyri of the Nile.